At exactly 3:14 a.m., the B-1 bridge suffered a catastrophic structural failure. The main pylon of the tallest bridge in the Middle East was no longer able to remain intact as a solid structure. A 2,000-pound GBU 31 JDAM slammed into the concrete at roughly 650 miles per hour. Its hardened steel nose drove deep into the reinforced core of the pylon, punching nearly 3 feet into the structure before the delayed action FMU-143 fuse activated. In the next instant, 900 pounds of high explosive transformed into a supersonic pressure wave. That impact marked the opening move of a tightly coordinated, covert U.S.-Israeli strike package, built to cripple critical Iranian infrastructure before air defense crews had time to fully react. The mission had started at 2 a.m. The strike group crossed into Iranian airspace at 15,000 feet, following a route carefully planned around the radar shadows cast by the Zagros Mountains. At the front were 4 Israeli F-35I Adir stealth fighters. These jets served as the eyes and brains of the operation, linking their sensor data into a single live picture of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps air defense network. With a radar signature comparable to a golf ball and moving at around 600 knots, the F-35I Adirs were built for exactly this kind of mission. Their onboard systems continuously sorted targets, identified the operating frequencies of Iranian S-300 and S-400 radar systems, and prepared to disrupt the enemy's early warning capability at the most critical moment. Behind them came 4 U.S. Air Force F-15E Strike Eagles, loaded with ordnance and flying at Mach 1.2, close to 920 miles per hour. At that speed, the airframe endured intense thermal stress, yet the crews remained dark and silent as they moved toward the target. Iranian defenses, however, were far from asleep. Passive infrared search and track systems were already scanning for heat signatures on the horizon. Unlike radar, these systems required no active emission, which meant the IRGC could watch for approaching aircraft without revealing its own position. They were waiting for the point of commitment, the moment the strike package could no longer turn back. The objective was the B-1 bridge, the tallest bridge in the Middle East and a major logistics link between Tehran and the western city of Karaj. Taking it out would severely disrupt the regime's ability to move heavy equipment, armor, and reinforcements across the region. Then, at 3:14 a.m., the first AGM-158 JASSM was released from an F-15E Strike Eagle from 50 miles away. Designed like a ghost, the missile's shape scattered radar returns, while its outer coating absorbed them, allowing it to cut through defended airspace with minimal warning. The missile raced just above the terrain at roughly 550 miles per hour, using its infrared seeker to compare the bridge's heat pattern against a preloaded 3D profile. When it struck the northern support pylon, the impact shattered reinforced concrete into clouds of fine gray dust. In that moment, the bridge was effectively torn away from the ground. Steel rebar built to withstand 2,000 tons of tension gave way in an instant. The 2,000-foot concrete roadway twisted like a giant whip under its own weight until the expansion joints finally failed. The first strike killed 2 civilians when vehicles were thrown from the span into the gorge below. The collapse itself was brutally fast. The roadway dropped into the valley at 32 feet per second squared and slammed into the ground with enough force to register as a seismic event on regional sensors. The route was gone. Tehran's response did not stop at its own borders. Within minutes of the bridge collapse, the IRGC launched a coordinated regional escalation. Reports from the Associated Press said Tehran fired a simultaneous missile barrage at sites in neighboring Gulf states and directly at Israel. The move was calculated to shake global energy markets and threaten the flow of oil and natural gas. In Tel Aviv, the night sky erupted during a reported cluster munition strike, with submunitions spreading across the city in a dense pattern of explosions. The IRGC made it clear that the bridge strike would not remain a single event. It was becoming the spark for a wider regional crisis, one severe enough to send oil prices surging toward a breaking point. The machines involved in this kind of war are extraordinary, but in the end they are only as capable as the people operating them under extreme pressure. Here, pilots and weapon systems officers spent 94 seconds inside a battlefield where every decision balanced mission success against survival. Some of the people watching this know that reality firsthand. You know the crushing pull of 9G. You know the sound of threat warnings filling the cockpit. If you have something to say to the families of the airmen still missing in the Zagros Mountains, or you want to share what it feels like to fly into that kind of danger, this is your place to speak. We stand with our operators. At the same time, chaos was unfolding over Tel Aviv. The second phase of the operation struck central Iran. That was the logic behind the plan. Hit 2 high-value targets at once and force Iranian command to decide where to send its limited quick-reaction forces. The targets in Isfahan were oil and natural gas processing facilities, the financial core of the regime. The weapon selected for the job was the GBU-39 small-diameter bomb. In a single sweeping release, the F-35I Adir dropped 16 of them at once. The SDBs cut silently through the cold desert air, their diamond-shaped wings fully deployed. One after another, they struck the refinery's storage tanks in a near-perfect sequence. The hardened tips punched through the steel first, and then the delayed blasts ignited vast reserves of high-octane fuel. What followed was a fire so intense that it softened and warped the asphalt on nearby highways. Above Isfahan, the night turned a deep orange. Fireballs climbed nearly 1,000 feet into the sky, bright enough to be detected by weather satellites orbiting 22,000 miles above the planet. As the F-15E Strike Eagle accelerated out of the area at Mach 1.4, close to 1,070 miles per hour, the IRGC answered with something no one had fully accounted for. Hidden in the Zagros Mountains, an Iranian air defense unit had stayed completely passive, waiting for the right optical or thermal lock. They held fire until the aircraft committed to its escape path. Then the missile detonated just 10 feet from the tail. The blast showered the jet with shrapnel, tearing through hydraulic lines and damaging the fuel manifold for the left engine. In seconds, a $100 million aircraft became a burning, uncontrollable wreck. The IRGC had shown it could still detect and engage even a target as elusive as a stealth-shaped aircraft moving at 600 knots. The pilot managed to eject, but the weapons systems officer disappeared into the smoke-filled sky over Khuzestan province. What happened in central Iranian airspace exposed a serious gap in American intelligence. Even as the U.S. president spoke of Iran's air defenses as if they had been fully neutralized, Iranian state television mocked that claim while the strike package was still leaving the target area. At that exact moment, the IRGC brought online a newly developed aerospace defense system that had remained completely silent during the initial approach. Unlike older systems, this one relied on high-frequency tracking methods that were designed to bypass the assumptions behind traditional stealth filtering. It was not just a defensive measure, it was a trap built to draw the F-15E into a concentrated kill zone over central Iran. Once it achieved a hard lock, it sent a clear message. Iran's air defense network was still operational and far from broken. As the Strike Eagle banked away from the target, that hidden system came alive. The pilot's radar warning receiver immediately shifted to a continuous wave alert. By then, surface-to-air missiles were already on the way. The pilot reacted with a brutal 9G brake turn, a maneuver that pushes the human body under 9 times the force of gravity and makes every movement feel impossibly heavy. He released bundles of chaff and magnesium flares, but the Iranian missile was equipped with a dual seeker system. It ignored the decoys and stayed locked on the heat trail pouring from the twin Pratt & Whitney engines. A split second later, the missile's proximity fuse detonated behind the left tail fin. The shrapnel ripped through the hydraulic system, turning the escape into a fight for survival. In an instant, the $100 million aircraft was swallowed by fire. The pilot pulled the ejection handles, and the Ace's 2 seats blasted both crew members out at roughly 400 miles per hour. Moments later, the jet slammed into the mountainside in Khuzestan, leaving behind a crater nearly 30 feet deep. The pilot survived. The weapons systems officer was never found. Near the Strait of Hormuz, the mission was no longer just an attack. It had become a fight to stay alive. An A-10 Warthog operating on the maritime flank was drawing attention away from the main action when it entered an area saturated with ground fire. The A-10 is famous for its 1,200-pound titanium cockpit armor, built to keep the pilot alive in the worst conditions. Flying just 200 feet above the water at around 350 miles per hour, the pilot attacked Iranian coastal patrol boats with the 30mm GAU-8 Avenger cannon. Its signature roar carried for miles, and its shells ripped through steel hulls with brutal efficiency. But the Iranian coastline had been turned into a layered defensive zone, packed with shoulder-fired missiles. IRGC teams on the ground showed discipline, holding their fire until the Warthog fully committed to its strafing pass. Then, the air lit up. Small arms fire sent thousands of 7.6 2mm and 12.7mm rounds hammering against the aircraft's armor. Then, a heat-seeking missile struck the right engine. Flames spread fast, fed by leaking hydraulic fluid. With the fire out of control, the pilot had no choice but to bring the aircraft down in the shallow coastal waters. Within minutes, Iranian state television was showing images of the wreckage, calling the missing American airmen a valuable prize and placing a bounty on them. The most dangerous fighting of the night came during the rescue attempt. As 2 HH-60 Pave Hawk helicopters entered the Zagros Mountains to recover the downed crew, they flew straight into intense enemy fire. Iranian ground forces flooded the rescue corridor with heavy small arms fire and machine gun bursts. The damage was immediate and severe. Both helicopters took hits. Their metal skins were torn open by 12.7mm rounds, and key internal systems began to fail. One Pave Hawk suffered a severed hydraulic line in the tail rotor drive shaft, causing violent vibrations that nearly ripped the aircraft apart. The door gunners fired back with .50 caliber machine guns, their tracer rounds cutting glowing lines through the darkness. On the valley floor, the impact of those rounds shredded Iranian technical vehicles as the battle intensified. Crew members aboard the helicopters were wounded when enemy fire pierced the thin fuselages. The IRGC had turned the crash site into a trap, using the downed F-15E as bait to draw in and damage the recovery force. Even so, the U.S. military followed the rule it always lives by. No one gets left behind. Within 20 minutes, a combat search and rescue task force was already on the move. 2. HH-60. Pave Hawk helicopters pushed deep into the Zagros Mountains. They flew nap of the earth, less than 50 feet above the jagged terrain at around 160 miles per hour. Through night vision goggles, the Black Mountain Range became a dim green landscape filled with shifting shadows. As the HH-60 Pave Hawks neared the F-15E crash site, IRGC ground forces were already in position. Heavy 12.7mm machine guns opened up from below. The Pave Hawk door gunners answered with .50 caliber fire, their tracers streaking through the darkness like long lines of burning light. On the valley floor, those rounds tore through Iranian technical trucks with devastating effect. One of the helicopters took a hit near the rotor mast. The vibration was severe, violent enough to threaten the aircraft's stability, but the pilot kept it under control. Despite the incoming fire, the crews found the F-15E pilot and pulled him out under intense pressure. The weapons systems officer, however, was still missing. His beacon never came alive. The second helicopter had to break away when two Iranian F-4 Phantom interceptors were directed into the area. At that point, the F-35 Ayadir showed exactly why it had been so critical to the mission. While the rescue helicopters fought their way through ground fire, the stealth fighters orbiting at 30,000 feet detected the incoming interceptors. The Iranian pilots had no idea they were the ones being targeted. They were searching for the helicopters, unaware that a stealth aircraft was tracking them from 40 miles away. The F-35I released two AIM-120 AMRAAMs. Accelerating to Mach 4, more than 3,000 miles per hour, the missiles used their own onboard radar in the final seconds to guide themselves in. The result was immediate. The first interceptor vanished in a sudden flash. The second pilot ejected before impact, shaken by the invisible strike that had just taken out his wingman. The CSAR helicopters made it out, but the WSO was still left behind in enemy territory. The bridge is down, but the operation is far from finished. What this engagement revealed is that even when the U.S. controls the tempo, victory is never cost-free. Every strike, every broken supply route, every refinery set ablaze carries a price. The B-1 bridge fell because of planning, stealth, and overwhelming force. But American aircraft were lost because the enemy proved disciplined, capable, and willing to adapt. They understood they might not stop the initial attack, so they concentrated on the withdrawal. Now that the full cost of the mission is becoming clear, the focus shifts away from destroyed infrastructure and toward the people still unaccounted for. The B-1 bridge is rubble. The effort to recover the missing WSO is only beginning. The world may be watching the smoke rising over Tehran. The real attention now is on the telemetry coming out of the Zagros Mountains. The bridge was hit. The next objective is bringing our people home. The chain of action does not end until the last pilot is safely back.